Hi guys, we're going to do a video about drugs and consciousness today. It's going to review the chapter or the module and should prepare you for the unit test as well as the final exam, the AP exam. Um, Before we get going here, tried to look up jokes about drugs and it turns out none of them are all appropriate for school. So I've got a joke that my fifth grader likes. Here it is. What happens when you throw a bunch of books in the ocean? You get a tidal wave. Okay. All right, let's start on drugs. First of all, what do we mean by drugs? Are we talking about prescription drugs? No, we're talking about psychoactive drugs. These are chemical substances that alter perceptions and mood, affecting your consciousness. There's going to be three main types we look at: depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens. So let's find out more about those three types. Depressants are drugs that reduce neural activity, that's brain activity, and slow down the body. They include alcohol, barbiturates, and opiates. Now, some people think alcohol is a stimulant because people at parties, I know you don't know this, I'm sure you've never seen this, but some people at parties get wild and crazy and it looks like they're stimulated. What's actually happening there is that their self-control is being depressed, it's being slowed down, and so that's why they're acting crazier. But when you drink, you are slowing it down, and you can see that when people drink too much, they pass out. So alcohol, what does it do? It affects motor skills, judgment, and memory. It also increases aggressiveness and reduces self-awareness. So the reducing self-awareness is the depressing part, and that's when people maybe act in ways they wouldn't normally act. My brother-in-law works in the emergency room, and Friday and Saturday night, it is full of drunk people that get in fights. He's on the front lines of seeing this increased aggressiveness. Now you can look at these two brain scans of these women. Um, Scan of a woman with alcoholism, scan of a woman without alcoholism. So you can see there are physical changes in the brain that happen when you are addicted to alcohol. Barbiturates are drugs that depress the activity of the central nervous system. They reduce anxiety. They can also impair memory and judgment. A lot of these are prescription drugs that people may get that are painkillers, or they might be sleep agents. So you might get them from a doctor and they're legal, but then people can become addicted and can start to abuse these drugs. Third category of depressants is opiates. The poppy plant, which is this plant over here, produces opium. That can be changed into several types of drugs. Codeine, morphine are sometimes used in hospitals as painkillers. It could also be turned into heroin, which is highly addictive. All of these are highly addictive. They depress the neural activity, decrease pain and anxiety. We'll talk more about heroin and its effects a little bit later. Okay, what about stimulants? We got a long list of stimulants here: caffeine, nicotine, cocaine, ecstasy, amphetamines, meth. Methamphetamines is just the full name for meth. These drugs are exciting neural activity and increasing body functions. So a lot of you have had caffeine. You know what that's like. Nicotine is going to be similar to that. Cocaine and ecstasy are going to be like, increase that by a magnitude of 10. And that's what cocaine and ecstasy and meth are going to be like. So you get a lot of energy, and it boosts your moods. Stimulants tend to boost your moods. I just had a cup of coffee, and I feel great right now. So caffeine and nicotine both increase heart rate, breathing rate, and other autonomic functions. Some people wonder about nicotine and why is it so addictive. it gives you a little rush like caffeine. And so people who get addicted, it's very hard for them to quit because they enjoy that rush. And it's not just smoking, it's dipping and chewing as well. Cocaine, obviously an illegal stimulant. It induces immediate euphoria. That's a sense of well-being, a sense of happiness and joy. And then you crash. So it'll last a few hours and then you'll crash. Crack is a form of cocaine that can be smoked. Other types of cocaine can be sniffed or injected. If you look at this graphic, I'm not sure if it's totally coming in or if my head is down here blocking it. But I want to go into what happens in the brain with cocaine. Cocaine gets into the synapse and it blocks the reuptake of 3 neurotransmitters. Let's see, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. And when those get blocked, you have more of those neurotransmitters in the synapse, and those neurotransmitters give you that feeling of euphoria, that feeling of being really happy and feeling really good. So that's how it works in the brain. Ecstasy is a stimulant. It's a pill you take. It's mildly hallucinogenic, produces another euphoric high. Unfortunately, there can be some long-term effects. It can damage the serotonin-producing neurons in your brain, which permanently deflates your mood and impairs your memory. So you're not going to want to get involved with ecstasy. Okay, third category of psychoactive drugs is hallucinogens. These are psychedelic drugs, which are mind-altering. Psychedelic means that they distort your perceptions. So you will have sensory images without the sensory input being there. So you might see things, you might feel things on your body. What are hallucinogens? Well, 2 of the most popular ones, or the most widespread, are LSD, which is also known as acid, and THC, which is the major active ingredient in marijuana. THC also kind of mellows you out. I think you can picture the stoner stereotype where somebody's really mellow and calm, but also there's mild hallucinating going on. There's a third hallucinogen that isn't listed in the textbook, but it's mushrooms. So certain wild mushrooms can cause you to hallucinate. Not all mushrooms. Plenty of mushrooms are good and healthy to eat. Okay, let's go into some drug terminology. One of the terms we should know is tolerance. Tolerance is the idea that with repeated exposure to a drug, the drug's effect lessens. So if you knew a 20-year-old, 21-year-old drinking a beer, if he drank a beer for a week, the second week, to get the same effect, he would need a couple beers. The third week, he'd need more beer. So as you are addicted to a drug, you tend to need more of it. There is also something called withdrawal. So when you stop using some of these drugs, you might experience an undesirable effect, some pain. Could be physical, could be psychological. So there's a couple different types of dependence on drugs. Physical is when your body is dependent upon it, and psychological is when you have emotions that are dependent upon it. So an example of a psychological dependence, it would be if you are really unhappy with your life. You're just sad, you're bummed out, you're not happy with your life. You start drinking to make yourself feel better, then you become addicted to the emotional effects of the alcohol. An example of the physical dependence, when people use heroin, the heroin gets in their brain and it replaces the body's natural production of endorphins, and endorphins are what make you feel really good, just in a natural, normal way. So when your body stops producing that, then if you quit the heroin, then you feel really bad. You feel physical pain. So heroin creates a physical addiction, a physical dependence. And when you have withdrawals with heroin, they're really severe. People feel really bad. It's very hard to quit using heroin when you're addicted. Okay, here's a summary chart of all the drugs. You can pause the video here if you want to read it. I'm not going to read it all to you. What about drug use over the past couple of decades? Here's it shows what happens in the 70s and 80s. You can see that drug use went down for a while. It looks like on most of these, so that was a good thing. Last thing I want to end up with is touching on this biopsychosocial model. I told you guys at the very beginning of the year that psychologists tend to understand people using the biopsychosocial model, that when there's a psychological disorder, there's biological effects, psychological effects, and social effects. And so this graphic here shows how drug use can be impacted by those three areas: the biological, the psychological, and the social cultural. So that's it for today. If you have any questions, see me in class, and I hope you do well on the test.